Thank you so much. And now we move on to the panel discussion that is the heart of today's closing plenary session, and the theme of which is who decides what the world knows, science, funding, and the new architecture of power. So this is going to be a conversation in which we will discuss how science, funding, and institutions are shaping global research priorities and influence what gets built, what gets scaled, and what new directions get pursued. And it is my real privilege to introduce the two panelists, and may I invite them to come up on stage. Our first panelist is Sethuraman Panchanathan. He's the former director of the National Science Foundation of USA. And he's trained as a computer scientist and engineer, and he served as the 15th director of the NSF from 2020 to 2025, which is an independent federal agency with the mission of advancing all fields of scientific discovery, technological innovation, and STEM education. His bio is so impressive that it would completely eat into our panel's time. So I'm going to skip and just tell you briefly, he's had a remarkable career as a scientist and engineer at the forefront of research with decades of distinguished work, deeply invested in public service. And as a scientist myself who was funded by the NSF, and watching him at the helm was not only a source of great pride as a member of the Indian diaspora making important contributions to national science and technology landscape in the United States, what was really remarkable about his tenure is the global networks that he created, the new research collaborative networks, understanding that science and technology are truly global enterprises. So his work and his vision in acceleration of translation of science and technology and spreading funding across the United States, focusing on the next generation and pivoting to the future. He's currently the University Professor of Technology and Innovation at Arizona State University, where he's held a faculty appointment since 1997. Welcome, Panch. And it is my distinct pleasure to also introduce our second panelist, Dr. Shivkumar Kalyanaraman, who is the CEO of ANRF, which is the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, the government of India's apex statutory body dedicated to transforming research and development ecosystems in the country with a special focus on academic research. He is also a globally recognized technologist and business innovator, and he brings a really rare blend of academic excellence, deep technology expertise, and industry leadership across multiple continents. He was also on the faculty of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the US, and like Panch, he has a very, very long list of awards, which I am going to skip in the interest of time, and just say that, you know, it's going to be a really fun conversation, and welcome both. I just want to start out by sort of posing the same question to both of you. What do you see as the key drivers or sort of the conditions for research, innovation, in science and technology? Shiv, do you want to take a shot first?
So look, I think from where I stand, but before I start, I want to thank Indiaspora and MR and all your colleagues for a wonderful time here, and I've really learned a lot being here. See, India stands at a critical juncture. We have fantastic spread of institutions all across the country, but we have so much more to achieve in terms of capability and untapped potential. So that's the frame with which I'm dealing with here in the country. So my goal is to see how we can rapidly accelerate, rapidly learn from what NSF and Panch have done, and move the country forward and the funding in the country forward, and be a catalyst for research and innovation in India.
Ansh, yeah.
Thank you, Priya, and great to be with Shiv. MR, thanks for inviting. I mean, Indiaspora is doing amazing work in terms of, as it was described today by Sanjeev, that bridge that we are building, I think, is getting stronger and stronger. And it's almost like I don't see this as two non-interesting circles, but actually coming together. It's so wonderful to see that. To answer your question, Priya, what are those factors? I think it all starts with the idea. I think idea is what makes the scientific discovery engine propel, right? And ideas come from people. And so, and what do people need? Investment. So to me, these are the three important things that we need to make sure that we have a lot of. So when you look at NSF, as I'm just going to take this, I shamelessly publicize NSF wherever I go. I take it as my license to do that. So I'm going to say a few things about NSF in this context, if I may. And you are a stellar example, no pun intended, in this, Priya, yourself. So NSF is a 75-year-old agency. It got started after World War II by a phenomenal scientist and a scientist leader who essentially, Vannevar Bush, who wrote this amazing treatment called Science, the Endless Frontier. The reason I say this, even today, science is an endless frontier, right? And so that set off the, what NSF is today. But let's talk about two things that I want to sort of emphasize in this context, because you may or may not know this. To date, NSF has funded over 270 Nobel laureates early in their career. There is no agency on planet Earth, including the United States, that has this kind of a track record, whether it is economics, physics, chemistry, or biology medicine. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make about NSF is, while doing this, NSF was also the agency that funded two graduate students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, in 1994 when they came up with a proposal for a digital libraries project. Yeah. And 5 years later, when they wrote the final report, they said, we found a company called Google a year prior in 98, and the rest is $1 trillion history. Right. There are thousands and thousands of companies like that which have their tire tracks back to NSF. So why do I say this? Because when we talk about ideas, people, and the investment, bringing this together, I believe, is what it is about. And I think NSF is an exemplar in this regard, and so are other agencies inside the United States and outside the United States, including METI and DST and DBT, and now ANRF in India. And I think it's a great future that we are still going to.
If only NSF had asked for 1% back of any research output. If only, right? Yes. We'd be funded.
But you know, Priya, I'll just, because people in the Congress have constantly in my testimonies, they would ask me, somebody would ask me, a congressional member or a senator would ask me, Panch, wouldn't that be a good way? I said, it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea because the moment you take an investment approach, you will avoid the risk.
Right.
High risk, high reward is what has kept NSF what it is. And so we should shy away from the temptation to do that.
Yeah. Anyway, so building upon this, right, what are the kinds of ecosystems and models that you, in your experience, that you've encountered, you know, either in sort of select pockets in India or the United States that have been most successful in kind of fueling this sort of innovation engine?
So again, as I said, India is in a very different point in its journey compared to the US. Always, that is the perspective we have to keep in. I mean, we have, you know, a huge upsurge of startups, as was mentioned in the earlier part of the discussion. But what we now need are more deeper technology startups or deep tech startups in general. So we have introduced a new investment vehicle called the RDI Fund, or the Research Development and Innovation Fund. It's a 1 lakh crore investment that is currently under ANRF. And so that's a different vehicle. It's an investment vehicle which complements the grant funding that we do. And so we think of these as complementary, like Panch said. When we do grants, we don't confuse that for investments where we're expecting return. I keep joking that without deep science, there's no deep tech. And when I give you a grant, I don't expect it back. But when I give you capital, I expect that back with return. So we're trying to be as clear as possible and, you know, in these things. So in terms of ecosystems, With our grant funding, we are looking at the not-for-profit research ecosystem. That includes, of course, academia, labs, and the Section 8 companies, translation, and other ecosystems. But when we are looking at investment, we are looking at the for-profit enterprise, whether that is startups, MSMEs, or even larger companies, but who are interested in doing research and development in India, right? So that's the two ecosystems we're trying to develop here.
So Priya, in this one, what I would say is, first of all, the ecosystem that is the most powerful engine in the United States is the higher education ecosystem. Yep. What they have done for the United States, and that's why it's a crown jewel. I keep reminding people in the United States, the crown jewel is the unbelievable higher education institutions that have propelled these ideas and talent that we talked about earlier. Second, in science terms, it is the infrastructure investment that you make, right? I mean, if you look at the unbelievable progress that have been made, whether it is the investment in the Antarctic infrastructure or Arctic infrastructure, whether to your close domain is in the telescope infrastructure, okay? Whether it is, the national lab infrastructure, that is a powerful engine of discovery, right? So these are, again, ecosystems that needs to surround the higher education institution ecosystems. That's the second thing that I would say. The third ecosystem, I believe, is the entire small business startup ecosystem that nations participate in through federal investments. And I think that's an extremely important thing to do. All three, in my view, are what propels the discovery engine, the translation engine, and all of the outcomes that you achieve from all of that.
So I think, as someone who does research in basic sciences, right? So there's always this sort of question about, what utility are the basic sciences for versus the applied. And I personally have been really kind of exhausted with this conversation because a couple of months ago, I was at Davos, and there was this complete frenzy with AI startups, and the amount of investment that was flowing in was literally quite obscene, the interest in investing, right? Without the realization or acknowledgement that, the base layer of everything that's happening in AI today is fundamental science. This is the work that was done for the last couple of decades. And if this is not continued, then there's going to be no progress, really. And, so I was very curious what, Panch, when you were at the NSF, you did amplify, NSF funding into sort of the more applied direction. So I was curious as to how do you see now the way things have unfolded, how does one ensure that the basic sciences are not really left out in funding?
Priya, that's an excellent question. So first, let me start with what you phrased this, the comment with. Wherever I go, I remind people that the AI of today that we celebrate is 5 to 6 decades of sustained investment by NSF. NSF is the largest, 80% of compute research investments, non-defense, is from NSF. And 5 to 6 decades of sustained investments is what has made AI possible today that we celebrate as if it happened overnight. In fact, I remind people that even during AI winters, when people were skeptical and were wondering where this is heading, NSF doubled down on the investments. And so that's a very important point, is that remind people, quantum, for example, it's another 3 to 4 decades of continuous sustained investments that's what's making quantum possible today. And you can take any technology of today, can always be traced back to sustained investment. So that's the first point I want to bring to your attention. The second point, which I think Priya was very kind to be generous in her comments, but I will tell you what she said to me outside, which is a little bit more, firm, and I will tell you the rationale there. NSF's budget trajectory, if you look at it in the last 75 years, has been a marginal 1 to 2% increase in good years. In not so good years, flat or even declining. This has been the trajectory of NSF funding for the last several decades. Now take in contrast NIH. NIH funding today, NSF is a $9 billion agency. NIH is a $48 billion agency.
This is powering the entire biomedical sort of sector.
Biomedical sector, yeah. Investment in health and biomedicine. And when you look at these 4-5 decades ago, or 3-4 decades ago, they were probably not that far apart. And when I came into NSF, or even before that, I've always wondered, why is it that when NSF is investing in all these fantastic areas of science, technology, and innovation, why is the growth of NSF in budget terms not as dramatic as what NIH is? And the answer is very simple. Because NIH has got two components. One is basic science, and another is clinical translational science. And when you talk to a senator, or the public, or a congressional member, or anybody for that matter, when you say, I'm going to cure Alzheimer's, diabetes, okay, or cancer, who is going to have any problems with it in saying, yeah, you should increase the budget by 10%, not 2%, 10% or 20%. And that's a trajectory that we have taken. Right. So when I came to NSF, I said, what does that mean for NSF? While we do a lot of the stuff that we talk about in terms of translation and startup companies and so on, we need to be out there taking responsibility and showing to the public, the senators, the congressmen, that we are in your backyard actually translating these things. Right. Just anecdotal stories is not sufficient. We need to be out there as part of our portfolio. And that's what made me emphasize this, not to overemphasize this, but emphasize this, underscore this, and guess what? Our budget increased by $1 billion in a year and a half. And that was not because they felt that discovery science needs to be supported more, but we did not take away from discovery science. So I say that when it is a $45 billion budget, nothing happens in health without discovery science. So if you look at percentage terms, let us say discovery science was invested 90% and 10% in NSF, and the budget was $9 billion. You can figure out the math. But let us say the budget became $13 billion, and you made it 85% and 15%. Yeah. You still promote discovery science at a much higher rate. Yeah. And that's what we have been trying to do, is how do we get NSF out there in the minds of people every day so that science is celebrated, discovery is celebrated, and invested in even more. And that was the strategic thinking, and almost intentional, if you may, to make that happen.
So I was just curious, so what is the budget of ANRF, and what % of our GDP is that?
That's an interesting
question.
question.
I mean, I think it has to be a higher % of the GDP than it is, but it was a pointed question too.
Yes. So first, I think one of the concerns in India is that the aggregate investment in R&D is at a low optimum, which is around 0.7% of GDP. I think it's something to be concerned about. And so the question is, obviously the government is committed to getting this to 1%, 2% of GDP. And ANRF was formed as an institution to solve several problems. One is, how do you start driving a larger trajectory towards this? The answers were twofold, right? One is to give ANRF a core budget and ask it to invest directly. Okay? So of course we have a core budget of 10,000 to 15,000 crores, and I have to raise additionally 36,000 crores from non-governmental sources. But the purpose of that...
This is annually sanctioned by the government, or you have to...
Yeah, this is over 5 years. Right. And then this is the core research budget. And then separately, we have an investment budget of 1 lakh crores over 5 years. This is our core budget. But ANRF also mops up or partners with different parts of the government. For example, we have different programs that we align. So we double or triple or quadruple our budgets that we do across by adding rest of government and driving extramural funding.
And you're also modeling your sort of disbursement procedures, proposal seeking, etc., on models like NSF, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our first challenge was, how do I get money out efficiently, right? So we had more basic challenges, and in India we want to, when I was in private sector, we were worried a lot about getting money in the door. Here we were in government, we were worried about getting money out of the door. So once we have sorted that out, now our next challenge is to raise the level of spending. And as well as one of the challenges in India is the incremental investment that is needed as a percentage of GDP is not just a government investment, but also we have to spark non-governmental investment. So, so one is partnerships of various kinds. So we are partnering with various foundations, including the Gates Foundation, the Vadvani Foundation, and others. And also we are partnering with companies. I see my friends in Google here. We're partnering with Google. We're partnering with others.
Right.
So again, you know, learning from the NSF playbook and so on in terms of partnerships that have been done in the US and so on.
Right.
But going forward, we'd love to partner a lot more with philanthropy. There was a great session on philanthropy and also the diaspora who would like to give back to India. We have many formats in which we can do that. So my goal is to set the stage, or, you know, I keep joking that I'm setting up a buffet of different options. Yep. And we'd love to see if Indiaspora would be willing to partner with us to help aggregate capital who is interested in supporting research and innovation in India, and then which again feeds in as a feeder to RDI and the larger investment vehicles that we have created. So we'd be open to new models, and so my goal is to not just invest what the government gives me, but also to drive an ecosystem both at the investment level as well as change the productivity of the engine of creation as well.
So I mean, I think, Panch, coming back to you, right, with the current assault on science and technology research funding in the United States, sadly, do you see a new kind of role for philanthropy, for private philanthropy? Do you see some kind of rebalancing of funding in terms of proportion of sort of the more private philanthropy-driven funding for basic sciences in universities and research institutes? And how do you see what the future could look like, or maybe needs to look like, given what's going on there right now?
That's a very, very good question, Priya. So I just want to give you some data points here. If you look at the annual research and development investment in the United States, it's 3.5% of the GDP. Okay?
Still lower than South Korea.
Sorry?
Still lower than South Korea.
Yes. But if you look at the actual dollars, clearly, and per capita, maybe, you know, you're right. So here is what I will tell you. Out of the 3.5%, 0.8% is what the federal government invests in. There is 2.7% of that essentially comes from the private sector, philanthropy, industry, and a whole host of others. Now, you should ask yourself the question, you know, when there are small perturbations, as important as they are, of a few $100 million or even $1 billion, people just get all torqued up. And they should. They should, because we should fight for every dollar of investment based on the outcomes that we achieve. So if you look at this, let's say almost $1 trillion, $900 billion of investment in science R&D and technology R&D, about $250 billion is what the federal government is, $650 billion is private sector. So therefore, there is a moment now that maybe we should start to think about how do we wire ourselves to not only, you know, advocate, make the case for, demonstrate the value, and therefore get increases in federal investments, understandably so. But even more importantly, see how we can strategize, synergize, and take advantage of the other $650 billion where possible. And people would say, particularly people like you, Priya, would say, but that's not for basic discovery research. That's primarily for, you know, what Google might be interested in the next model or these kinds of applied research. And the answer I give often is there is significant amount of philanthropy, back to that point. Philanthropy increasingly is looking at what they might do in supporting fundamental discovery research. So it's a multi-sector approach to this for the multifaceted needs in terms of advancing the science, engineering, aspirations, and talent development.
Right. I mean, and I think there needs to be a bit of a shift in mindset.
Absolutely.
With a lot of private philanthropy, you know, understanding the relevance and importance of basic science and funding and supporting it. And I think we're increasingly seeing some, you know, private foundations in the US kind of pivoting towards funding, like the Schmidt.
And the Science Philanthropy Alliance, for example, is precisely trying to accomplish that. How do you bring all of that convergence and seeing if we can invest in, you know, discovery
areas?
I
think, Shivkumar, this may be a very interesting moment for you to see if that you can catalyze that in India, bring together
absolutely.
these sort of.
Absolutely. We are at a moment where we are ramping up government funding significantly. I have doubled or quadrupled the amount of funding we are doing for basic sciences. We are doing things at the intersection of AI and science and engineering through specified programs. And I will also invite the diaspora here to consider contributing more to their alma mater or partnering with us. If you'd like to partner with ANRF, we are happy to match whatever you provide. And of course, as long as you're contributing through our ANRF programs, we are happy to do that. So, so we are looking at different models of doing this, Indiaspora can be a fantastic bridge to help make this happen, and I would welcome other bridges that can happen. And when Panch was in NSF, he set up an MOU between NSF and ANRF. We'd like to create some government-to-government bridges, but increasingly the non-governmental bridges are equally, if not more important, given the mix that Panch talked about. And in India, we have a skewed mix. We have a mix where it's largely government-driven. And we'd like to catalyze a lot more of non-government to happen, and the diaspora can play a very, very important role there. And we would welcome a lot more contributions, and we are willing to match.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting opportunities that you have in India is that, aside from high tech, as it were, there's a lot of work that can be done and needs to be done on appropriate technologies. Sort of, addressing important rural challenges in India with fairly simple science and technology solutions, but just diverting talent to looking at that, right? Looking at more efficient pumps, water pumps, toilets, energy, solar panels, installation, and water transmission. So I mean, before the clock is ticking, and before we close, it would be remiss of me to not address the big question which is facing all of science and technology today, which is a pressing and important question, an exciting one too. What do you see as the role of AI? So AI for science, and in particular, right, AI has the power to transform not just the practice of science and completely change the pace of discoveries and breakthroughs. We are starting to see that. But there's a lot of concern about whether a human scientist and the way in which we see science being done today is actually going to survive this revolution. So I would love some closing thoughts from both of you on what you see as a bright future, bleak future, checkered future, optimistic, pessimistic. Take your shot.
Well, I'll take a couple of minutes on that. So first, I see a bright future. There is incredible amount of talent, and there is so many societal problems also connecting to the earlier question. We have a large program called Leapfrog Demonstrators for Societal Innovation we are launching shortly as well. At the same time, we have an AI for Science and Engineering program that connects our scientists and engineers with our AI talent and driving innovation in those areas, as well as fundamental models. And we are driving all of this with an open IP approach. All the models developed under our program, which is right now around an 800 crore program, which will ultimately become a 1,000 crore plus program, is all open. So whatever we are doing, just like we had an India stack of UPI and other digital technologies, we will be making all our IP created under an MIT license as well.
But do you see who does science? Do you see a fundamental shift coming in that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who or what does science?
Who or what does science? Agents doing science. So look, I think we are in for a huge change, and it's very hard to predict. And whatever we predict will be useless in a couple of months, given the rate of change. So I think we are just humbled to say that we've got to get on this boat. We've got to not miss this bus and move on and start adopting and getting our scientists and engineers really working together. I think that's our modest initial goal. At the same time, whatever we contribute, will be made as a global public goods, right? So I think that's the view we take. We see, just like you made in your remarks, changes in how science is discovered, both how deep science is translated to deep tech, how deep tech is translated to impact on society. And we have a lot of societal problems, right? Can I press an AI button to solve pollution? Can I press an AI button to solve Bangalore traffic? We can't yet, quite. I mean, even though, so there is a lot of role for humans to play to bridge the gap between the potential of AI, the way science is done, and the way science is translated to solutions to societal problems. So I see a lot more brighter future, if we can, up the pace of science.
Priya, I'm an optimist. That's what Science Magazine accused me of when I joined NSF. So I will take that accusation. So
Glad you are.
So let me tell you about your question. Yes, science is going to be empowered, enriched, augmented, transformed. The discovery process will be transformed, and all for the better. I think that's how I view this. I don't view this as a substitution as much as an augmentation, empowerment, enrichment, and transformation. So that's the first part of this. And when I was at NSF, one of the things that we launched in addition to the Technology Innovation Partnership Directorate and the Regional Innovation Engines, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that in great detail, but the public-private partnership was in full display. I put in $150 million. We got $1.2 billion that came along with that, right? So let's go to AI institutes that we launched.
Yep.
We launched in the 3 years, 27 AI institutes.
Right.
And the 27 AI institutes, each of them $20 million scale, which we launched in a fast pace, is all across the nation and in partnership with many other agencies, industry, and philanthropy. In fact, the 2 astronomy ones were funded by Simons Foundation. I talked to Jim Simons before he passed, and we got that investment, which I think is a great way of advancing AI in astronomy and what astronomy can become because of AI. And so the 5, I take a lot of pride in this. The 5 AI institutes that we launched was an investment made by US Department of Agriculture. $100 million. I didn't put a penny from NSF. $100 million by the US Department of Agriculture for 5 AI institutes in agriculture that NSF launched in partnership with USDA. So, and then I will be remiss if I didn't say this. We also launched the National AI Research Resource, to what Krishnan was talking about, democratizing AI access. 3 years ago, we launched the NAIR in partnership with NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, a whole host of companies, 25 of them. They all brought in humongous amount of compute resources, model resources, application resources, data resources, and then we made it available to all the researchers so that they might then bring their ideas to reality. And so this NAIR now has gotten a NAIR 2.0, but more importantly, that has become the precursor. If you are checking what's going on in the United States, check out this Genesis initiative launched by the Department of Energy recently, which is a large-scale effort, again, in terms of how do you empower scientific discovery through the bringing together of resources from all sectors participating in this. And it's truly an exciting time.
Yeah.
Truly an exciting
time. And of course, I am super thrilled that, people like me will not be out of a job because, human scientists will still be needed. Anyway, with this great optimism for the future of science and technology, I'd like to thank our panelists and turn over the floor to MR. Yeah. Thank you so much.